I did actually have a kind of, video gamey conversation back and forth with my chat about what makes a role-playing game like a video game RPG. And I wanted to make a checklist of, like, I guess the top 10 things that I would check off to make it, like, it doesn't have to have all of them, but the more it has, the more I think it fits into the RPG category.
Okay.
So, like, it could be argued that, like, Dark Souls is an RPG, right? Action RPG.
Yeah.
Because you jump into the role of whatever, a maidenless, or, like, yeah, exactly, a hollow, whatever.
Yeah.
And you get to customize your character and stuff like that. So we got to discussing, like, what is the most RPG you've ever played. And in my opinion, excuse me, not in my opinion, but in my experience, I guess in my opinion, the most RPG that I ever played would probably be, like, Morrowind or something of the Elder Scrolls variety, because you get to customize your character. That it marks off a lot of check boxes that I would put on an RPG list. You get to customize your character. You get to make your own choices. Your choices affect the world. You get to decide how you go about, like, video games have to have, like, certain encounters and shit like that along the way. But along the way getting there, how many paths are available to you to get there, I think makes it an RPG. Like, are there tons of different multiple paths? But the converse of that was you jump into a role that is not you. So, like, some people prefer it not to be, like, to be a pre-made character, and you pretend that you are them.
By that,
so, like,
definition,
so
though,
you
all
do not
games
serve
are
as
RPGs.
the role.
Yeah.
That is, JP, you beat me to it.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to steal your thunder.
Well, funny enough, here, not only would that make pretty much every game a RPG, but that would mean that one of the facets of the definition of being your own character would then be basically on the opposite spectrum of that. You see what I'm saying? Like, it would, because it's either or. It's not really and in a situation like that. So if both of those are in the same genre, then you're basically just saying, like, all games are RPGs, which I think, like, so can I jump in here real quick, Zeke?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So here's the thing.
You never ask me when I'm the host if you can jump in. What the fuck is this, Co?
It's because I respect Zeke. So basically what I'm thinking is, no. The reason being is because I didn't know if Zeke was done.
Clip it.
No, I got it
right now. You clip that shit right this moment.
So, yeah, well, we tell jokes on this show. You know that, Zeke. I don't respect it. Anyway, so here,
I'll take out of context.
Here's the thing. Like, games are at this point, like, when a good way to think about this is the term CRPG. CRPG started as something because it needed a name for what it was. CRPG was computer RPG. That's because most of the RPGs, when CRPGs came out, were like pen and paper or book-based. So they needed a term to define what that is. Now, the thing is RPG has kind of grown way outside of where it started. Very similar to the term ARPG. Like, ARPGs can be anything from Dark Souls to Diablo to, like, tons and tons of things are ARPGs these days that frankly don't have anything to do with each other. In fact, some cases play completely differently. They're still ARPGs. So I feel like that's the same way with the term RPG, because I think you just brought up, funny enough, the exact points of what I'm saying. Take a game like Pillars of Eternity. Right? That is a trademark CRPG by both old and new definitions. It follows a huge story with all pre-written characters, a pre-written arc. You have kind of somewhat freedom in terms of where you go and stuff, but everything is like a narrative being told to you. That is an RPG for sure. Divinity Original Sin, same thing. Baldur's Gate 3, same thing. You have origin characters. So you are actually playing the role of a person that has a history, that has its own drives, its own wants. You are jumping into that role. Same vein. Then you have a game like Outward, or you have custom characters in CRPGs where it's like, now you are you. You could put your first name, your last name. You are in that world as you. And Outward is a great example. Outward, there's no main story really. In fact, there's like 4 regions and you join a region and then that becomes your main story. You can go wherever you want, whenever you want. There's basically no predefined narrative until you like join a thing. And then even then the order is all up to you. So at this point, RPG is like a bucket term. It's a bucket term of a ton of different mechanics that have now been cherry picked even by other genres. So like, you know, RPGs have stats. Well, so does Gran Turismo. RPG has stories and deep stories. Yeah, well, so some of the best action games that don't have stats have those that you would never qualify as an RPG. You know, all these pretty much, you could define an RPG as a container or a bucket of different traits. But even then, some of those traits are going to be completely opposite, like make your own story or follow an established narrative. And yeah, somebody just said GTA has great stories and a main story. Absolutely right. And I mean, some people would argue GTA is an RPG, funny enough. So it's kind of like when you define RPG, and I'm getting to a point, don't worry. When you define RPG, the point that I'm making is that it's always based on the perspective of what that person wants from their RPGs and what they enjoy most about them. It has become a personal term instead of a global term, which unfortunately is the way of a lot of genres these days. Like some genres have predefined boundaries, like fighting game, racing game, but you start getting a lot murkier when you start picking things like RPG, action game, action RPG, you know, like those become real gray. So I would say like there are RPGs, for instance, that don't use any stats. Like when someone says RPG, one of the first things I think of is, oh, well, stats, obviously. Well, there's some RPGs that don't use stats at all. So it's kind of like, you know, it's very much going to be based on the person who's asking the question and what they expect from that term. Yeah.
And that's kind of why, like, I wanted to make like a checklist. I'm not the checklist to like definitively say something is an RPG, just the checklist of like the 10 main things that how deep is your RPG? Like how deep can you role play? Which is what, you know, role playing game.
Right.
This whole conversation came up and JP, like you might want to, or you could probably chime in on this because I said the topic of Final Fantasy 16 came up and I said, it's barely a role playing game anymore. Like Final Fantasy 16 to me does not feel like a role playing game. As much like there's certain aspects, sure, that are RPG like, but like games that have come before it, the Final Fantasies that have come before it, but also like I made that you know, I made the comparison to Dark Souls. Like Dark Souls is more of an RPG than this is than Final Fantasy 16, and we had a back and forth about that because and that's how this topic came up. Like, well, what things does a game have to have to make it an RPG for you? And I was like, you know what? That's a good question.
And Final Fantasy 16 is a perfect example because I'm actually in your boat. Final Fantasy 16 for me is an ARPG. It's not a JRPG. It's not a traditional RPG. Final Fantasy 16 is an action RPG. I'd also argue maybe something like Devil May Cry in some ways is an action RPG. And its borders kind of actiony. And in the same vein, like you take the older games and it's easy and quick to be able to define those. Kind of gets murkier as you go through the Final Fantasy timeline, especially as you start bringing in ATB and stuff like that. But still, like with Final Fantasy 16, and I talk about this at length in the thoughts video I made for it, they mute the RPG mechanics. They take the volume on those and they turn them down, way down. Like looting becomes not even a thing by the end of the game. The stats, like your weapons just having 2 stats, like attack and magic. There's no defensive stats outside of like some trinkets and stuff. Like here's your marketing term for you. It is a streamlined experience that focuses the game on the characters, the story, the action combat, that kind of thing. But I would completely agree with you. The thing that I would say during the playthrough was you put Witcher 3 on one side and classic Final Fantasy on the other, and 16 is way more weighted towards Witcher 3. Like way more. Like it's grown away from its roots. There's like an entirely other discussion on if you think that's a good or bad thing. But there's no question that the devs have publicly said and stated They have wanted to do this with the franchise to get it to a more general audience. And that's kind of just where we are. And then it's up to each person to decide, you know, hey, if this is working for me or not.
Yeah. I think God of War kind of not forced their hands, but influenced their hands in shaping what they wanted that game to be. They saw the success of it and saw that it was approachable for, you know, a multitude of fans. They're like, we should get one of those into the Final Fantasy mainline series, saga, whatever. That's where they went. So,
and even then, arguably, God of War is
it's deeper,
far more RPG.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I would say it's deeper.
I mean, completely deeper in terms of almost all the mechanics.
Yeah. And I think that's, I mean, I'm pretty sure Yoshi P is said as such, like that they were very nervous about doing this and they like alienating the Final Fantasy world that has existed for so long, world being fan base. And so I hope if 17 or if they do DLC or do something else, like I hope they lean into more of that and you know, iterate on all the systems that already exist in the game and make them better. Better is a weird term. Make them deeper is how I would prefer it. Like make items mean something instead of just a stat stick in that.
So basically you're saying you hope they take a step backwards in terms of the direction they're heading.
I guess, yeah. I mean, keep the combat. I think the combat is fantastic, but I think like everything that the RPG aspect of preparing for combat to go into combat, expand on that, if that makes sense. Yeah. Like give me a better crafting system. Give me, you know, just make all the systems deeper instead of like so short and small. And those are a lot of negative terms. I've enjoyed the game thus far. I don't know where you guys are on it, but I've enjoyed it immensely. Have not finished it yet.
I'll say this is their best-selling Final Fantasy game, I believe, ever. Correct me if I'm wrong there.
Ooh, I don't know. Maybe in terms of time. I don't know.
Help me out here.
7 or 8 was pretty crazy.
It is one of their bestsellers. I think all of us have probably seen this. I know I've seen it a ton, and I know they've seen it. So many people have said two things. One, this is my favorite Final Fantasy. I hear that all the time. And two, this game got me playing Final Fantasy.
I've seen that a lot, yeah.
All over the place. And I think that's exactly what they were doing with this. That's exactly what they wanted. So to put it bluntly, I'll call it now. I wouldn't be surprised at all if we see Final Fantasy head towards just being an action game.
Yeah.
And I think they may do what Ubisoft is doing. I think they may have like a flagship, in lack of a better way of saying this, I think they may have a flagship cash cow, which will be what they're doing with the main franchise. And then I think they're going to have the Final Fantasy VIIs and the rebirths and the games that are for the more kind of we enjoyed the previous stuff more crowd. Kind of like Ubisoft is doing with Mirage and their other guys. Like I if anything, I think they're going to try to do more in both directions. But I would be very pleasantly, but very surprised if they were to go back on anything in 16 with the success that it's seen.
Yeah.
I think we're in for, if you don't like the itemization and RPG mechanics of 16, buckle up. Because then, I don't know if you're even going to want to play the next one, most likely.
Right, yeah. Well, I also think that Square Enix would probably point players that want, you know, the Final Fantasy VI style of gameplay to be like, here's Octopath, right? Like we make those games still.
Yeah, exactly. maybe they're gonna fan that out to like other franchises and other areas.
And did you finish Octopath 2, by the way?
No.
Okay.
I had a lot more fun in 2 than I did 1. I felt like almost everything about it was better. But I did get to a point where unfortunately very similar to the first one, I felt that it was just there's a little bit too much filler in there for me. I mean, when you have 8 different stories going on, it's the kind of thing where that's just so much content that it multiplies out how much filler there is.
Sure. Yeah.
So and I just got to a few points where I was just like, man, it just slowed down a little too much for me. But that being said, if I have more time to just do that kind of stuff. It's a solid game, and I did enjoy all my time in it. So
yeah, everyone that I know that has finished it has said it's a fantastic RPG.
I heard, unfortunately, it really ramps up towards the end, and it's like, cool, but I don't really have 148 hours.
Exactly.